thrust forward, and the thin points of a mustache thrust up. He was saying in a tone of patronizing boredom, "Well, I don't know. All of you are crying about rising costs. It seems to be the stock complaint nowadays. It's the usual whine of people whose profits are squeezed a little. I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to decide whether we'll permit you to make any profits or not." Reardon glanced at Francisco, and saw a face that went beyond his conception of what the purity of a single purpose could do to a human countenance. It was the most merciless face one could ever be permitted to see. He had thought of himself as ruthless, but he knew that he could not match this level, naked, implacable look, dead to all feeling but justice. Whatever the rest of him, thought Reardon, the man who could experience this was a giant. It was only a moment. Francisco turned to him, his face normal, and said very quietly, "I've changed my mind, Mr. Reardon. I'm glad that you came to this party. I want you to see this." Then, raising his voice, Francisco said suddenly, in the gay, loose, piercing tone of a man of complete irresponsibility, "You won't grant me that loan, Mr. Reardon? It puts me on a terrible spot. I must get the money. I must raise it tonight. I must raise it before the stock exchange opens in the morning, because otherwise—" He did not have to continue, because the little man with the mustache was clutching at his arm. Reardon had never believed that a human body could change dimensions within one's sight, but he saw the man shrinking in weight, in posture, in form, as if the air were let out of his lumps, and what had been an arrogant ruler was suddenly a piece of scrap that could not be a threat to anyone. Is there something wrong, Signor d'Anconia? I mean on the stock exchange?" Francisco jerked his finger to his lips with a frightened glance. "Keep quiet," he whispered. "For God's sake, keep quiet." The man was shaking. "Something's wrong? You don't happen to own any d'Anconia copper stock, do you?" The man nodded, unable to speak. "Oh my, that's too bad. Well, listen, I'll tell you. If you give me your word of honor that you won't repeat it to anyone. You don't want to start a panic." "Word of honor," gasped the man. "What you'd better do is run to your stockbroker and sell as fast as you can, because things haven't been going too well for d'Anconia copper. I'm trying to raise some money, but if I don't succeed, you'll be lucky if you'll have 10 cents on your dollar tomorrow morning." "Oh my, I forgot that you can't reach your stockbroker before tomorrow morning." "Well, it's too bad, but—" The man was running across the room, pushing people out of his way like a torpedo shot into the crowd. "Watch," said Francisco austerely, turning to Reardon. The man was lost in the crowd. They could not see him. They could not tell to whom he was selling his secret, or whether he had enough of his cunning left to make it a trade with those who held favors. But they saw the wake of his passage spreading through the room, the sudden cuts splitting the crowd, like the first few cracks, then like the accelerating branching that runs through a wall about to crumble, the streaks of emptiness slashed, not by a human torch, but by the impersonal breath of terror. There were the voices abruptly choked off, the pools of silence, then sounds of a different nature, the rising, hysterical inflections of uselessly repeated questions, the unnatural whispers, a woman's scream, the few spaced, forced giggles of those still trying to pretend that nothing was happening. There were spots of immobility in the motion of the crowd, like spreading blotches of paralysis. There was a sudden stillness, as if a motor had been cut off. Then came the frantic, jerking, purposeless, rudderless movement of objects bumping down a hill by the blind mercy of gravitation, and of every rock they hit on the way. People were running out, running to telephones, running to one another, clutching or pushing the bodies around them at random. These men, the most powerful men in the country, those who held unanswerable to any power, the power over every man's food and every man's enjoyment of his span of years on earth, these men had become a pile of rubble, clattering in the wind of panic, the rubble left of a structure when its key pillar has been cut. James Taggart, his face indecent in its exposure of emotions which centuries had taught men to keep hidden, rushed up to Francisco and screamed, "Is it true?" "Why, James," said Francisco, smiling. "What's the matter? Why do you seem to be upset? Money is the root of all evil, so I just got tired of being evil." Taggart ran toward the main exit, yelling something to Orrin Boyle on the way out. Boyle nodded and kept on nodding with the eagerness and humility of an inefficient servant. then darted off in another direction. Cheryl, her wedding veil coiling like a crystal cloud upon the air as she ran after him, caught Taggart at the door. "Jim, what's the matter?" He pushed her aside, and she fell against the stomach of Paul Larkin as Taggart rushed out. 3 persons stood immovably still, like 3 pillars spaced through the room, the lines of their sight cutting across the spread of the wreckage. Dagny looking at Francisco. Francisco and Reardon looking at each other.